The table of made men erupted in cruel laughter when the boss pulled out a chair for the heavy-set waitress in a stained uniform. They thought she was a sick joke, a plaything. They didn't know she was already counting their sins and orchestrating their funerals. Clara wiped down the cracked laminate counter of the Rusty Spoon for the fourth time that hour, her reflection warped in the greasy stainless steel of the pie display. It was November 18, 2025, 2:14 a.m. The neon sign buzzing outside on 412 West 43rd Street flickered, casting a sickly red glow over the empty diner. Clara sighed, the sound heavy, much like the body she carried. At 280 pounds, she knew exactly how the world saw her. Invisible when she was useful, an eyesore when she wasn't. Society had a way of looking right through her, their gazes sliding off her thick waist and broad shoulders as if she were a piece of the worn furniture. She preferred the graveyard shift. Fewer eyes, less judgment. Just the rhythmic hum of the refrigerators and the quiet crushing weight of a 42,819 nos. 45 hospital bill sitting in her apron pocket, the final futile price of her mother's battle with pancreatic cancer. Outside, tires screeched against wet asphalt. A heavy thud reverberated through the diner's front wall, rattling the coffee mugs. Clara froze. The brass bell above the door didn't chime. It violently tore off its hinges as a man crashed through the entrance. He didn't walk. He collapsed, a tangled mess of torn bespoke wool and blood, sliding down the glass pane of the door and leaving a thick crimson smear. He was gasping. Short, ragged breaths. Clara didn't scream. Years of absorbing the world's quiet cruelties had beaten the panic out of her. She stepped out from behind the counter, the linoleum squeaking under her orthopedic shoes. As she approached, the man raised his head. His eyes were the color of slate, cold and desperate, set in a face all sharp angles and bruised aristocracy. Dante Rossetti. Not that Clara knew his name, but she knew power when she saw it, even when it was bleeding out on a cheap diner floor. "Lock it," he choked out, his hand clutching his abdomen. Dark blood pulsed between his fingers, thick and steady. Headlights swept across the front windows. 2 black SUVs skidded to a halt outside. Without a word, Clara grabbed Dante by the collar of his ruined Brioni suit. He was heavy, pure dead weight, but Clara was built for bearing burdens. She hauled him across the floor, his Italian leather shoes leaving twin streaks of blood. She shoved him behind the counter, dragging him toward the back kitchen, just as the front door was kicked wide open. "Where is he?" a voice barked. Clara shoved Dante into the walk-in freezer. "Wait here," she mouthed, pulling the heavy metal door shut until only a crack remained. She threw her apron over the blood pool on the kitchen floor, kicked a mop bucket over the trail in the diner, and grabbed a rag, turning to face the 3 men storming her kitchen. They held suppressed pistols, men in cheap leather jackets with dead eyes. "Fat cow," the lead man spat, his gun leveled at her chest. "A guy in a suit just came in here." "Where?" Clara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, but her face remained a mask of dull, bovine indifference. It was the face she gave customers who undertipped, the face she gave doctors who told her to lose weight. "Guy came in," she drawled, her voice flat. "Bleeding all over my floor. Said he needed a cab. I told him the payphone is out back in the alley. He ran through the fire exit." She pointed a finger toward the back door. The men didn't even look at her face. They just looked at her mass, dismissing her instantly as stupid, slow, and harmless. "Check the alley," the leader snapped. They bypassed her entirely, kicking open the fire door and rushing out into the freezing rain. Clara immediately locked the heavy deadbolt behind them. She turned back to the freezer, wrenching the door open. Dante was slumped against a stack of frozen ground beef, his skin gray. She knelt beside him, her knees popping loudly in the quiet cold. "You didn't give me up," he whispered, his teeth chattering. "I don't like bullies," Clara said simply. She unbuttoned his shirt. A bullet wound, clean through the side, missing the major organs but nicking a vein. "You're going to bleed out. I have a first aid kit." Needles, fishing line. It's going to hurt. Do it. For the next 20 minutes, Clara worked in silence. Her large, soft hands were surprisingly steady, weaving the thick thread through his torn flesh. Dante watched her. He was surrounded by superficial beauty, models, assassins, women starved down to bone and sinew who looked at him with dollar signs in their eyes. But this woman, she looked at him like he was just another chore, a broken thing that needed fixing. When she finished, she handed him a cup of black coffee. The scent of copper and cheap roast filled the small space. "Dant," he said, taking the mug with trembling hands. "Clara," she replied, not looking up as she scrubbed his blood off her hands in the industrial sink. He reached into his breast pocket, pulling out a thick, blood-stained stack of hundreds, $10,000 easily. He tossed it onto the metal prep table. "For the trouble, Clara." A black 2023 Mercedes-Maybach S680 pulled up an hour later. Dante's own men. Clara watched him leave, the money sitting untouched on the table for a long time. She used it to pay off her mother's medical debt the very next day. She thought that was the end of it, a bizarre secret she would take to the grave. But 3 nights later, the bell to the diner chimed. Clara looked up from wiping the counter. Dante Rossetti stood there in a pristine charcoal suit, looking entirely out of place amidst the fluorescent lights and faded vinyl booths. He didn't sit. He walked straight to the counter, leaning in close. "I need someone I can trust," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. "Someone who sees everything, and whom no one else sees. Pack your things, Clara. You're coming with me." The penthouse at 880 Fifth Avenue was a monument to cold, hard wealth. White marble floors that mirrored the sprawling New York skyline, imported Italian leather furniture, and a silence so profound it made Clara's ears ring. She stood in the foyer clutching a plastic grocery bag containing her few worldly possessions, wearing a faded navy blue peacoat that suddenly felt like sandpaper against the luxury surrounding her. From the sunken living room, the low murmur of men's voices stopped abruptly as Dante led her in. There were 4 men seated around a glass coffee table, scattered with blueprints and ash. The one closest, underboss Leo Capelli, a man with a face like a hatchet and a silk shirt unbuttoned to expose a gold chain, looked Clara up and down. His lip curled into a sneer. Next to him, Thomas Rossi, the family consigliere, casually adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Boss," Leo said, his voice dripping with barely concealed amusement. "You ordered a maid? Because I think the agency sent you the whole damn kitchen." A few chuckles broke out. The sound was sharp, slicing through Clara's chest. She had heard it all her life. The jokes, the casual cruelty. She instinctively crossed her arms over her stomach, shrinking into herself. Dante didn't laugh. He stopped dead, the temperature in the room plummeting. He walked slowly toward Leo, his slate eyes dead and flat. Before anyone could blink, Dante grabbed the heavy crystal ashtray off the table and smashed it across Leo's jaw. The crack of bone echoed like a gunshot. Leo hit the floor, spitting blood and teeth onto the pristine white rug. "Her name is Clara," Dante said, his voice eerily quiet. "She breathes because I allow it. You speak to her, you look at her, with anything less than absolute reverence. I will tear your tongue out." "Understood." The room froze. Rossi stared wide-eyed. "Understood, Dante." Dante turned to Clara, gesturing to a hallway. "Your room is the last door on the right." Later that night, long after the men had left, Clara found Dante standing on the balcony, nursing a glass of amber liquid. The wind whipped at his hair. She stepped out softly, her heavy footfalls silenced by the thick carpet. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Break his jaw. I'm used to it." Dante didn't turn around. No one should be used to that. He took a slow sip. "On October 12, 2014, my younger brother was bled out in a warehouse in Queens. The men who did it were my friends. Men I ate with. Men who smiled at me. In this world, Clara, beauty and charm are just masks for predators. I look at my crew and I don't know who is holding the knife." He finally turned to look at her, his eyes hollow, haunted by a profound, crushing loneliness. But you don't wear masks. You know what it is to be hunted by people's perceptions. I need your eyes. Clara swallowed hard. Beneath the terror of the Mafia boss, she saw a boy trapped in a cage of his own making. What do you want me to do? Just be yourself. Be invisible, and tell me what they do in the shadows. For the next 3 weeks, Clara became a fixture in the penthouse. The men learned to ignore her, writing her off as Dante's bizarre charity case. They assumed she was dull-witted because she was quiet. They assumed she was lazy because she moved slowly. It was the greatest advantage she had ever been given. On December 2nd, Dante hosted a massive sit-down. Capo heads from 3 different boroughs filled the dining room. Clara was tasked with pouring the espresso and clearing the plates. She moved around the room like a ghost, a large, silent shadow. As she poured a double espresso for Thomas Rossi, she accidentally bumped the table. Rossi cursed, pulling his phone from his pocket to wipe a drop of water off the screen. For a fraction of a second, the screen illuminated. Clara's sharp eyes caught it. It was a burner phone, cheap plastic, displaying a text message, Doc 4 clear. 2M rerouted. D suspects nothing. The area code at the top of the message was 973. Newark, the territory of the Moretti family, Dante's blood rivals. Clara retreated to the kitchen, her mind racing. She waited until the early hours of the morning, creeping into Dante's private office. She bypassed the locked filing cabinet, knowing Dante kept the overflow shipping ledgers in the bottom drawer of his mahogany desk. She pulled them out, her eyes scanning the columns. Mathematics was Clara's refuge. Numbers didn't judge her weight. They didn't lie. She spent 3 hours cross-referencing the Port Newark manifests from the last 6 months. There it was, a discrepancy buried beneath layers of shell companies. 500 crates of high-end electronics and raw pharmaceuticals signed off by Thomas Rossi, heavily undervalued. Over a span of months, $4 million was siphoned out of Dante's operations and funneled into dummy accounts in New Jersey. Rossi wasn't just stealing. He was funding the Morettis for a coup. Clara grabbed the ledger, her heart pounding in her throat. She had to tell Dante before the sunrise meeting. She turned toward the office door. A shadow filled the doorframe. Thomas Rossi stood there, the warm, cruel smile wiped clean from his face. The ambient light caught the metallic sheen of the suppressed Heckler & Koch U-Wesp gripped in his right hand. The silencer was pointed directly between Clara's eyes. "You know, Clara," Rossi whispered, stepping into the room and closing the heavy oak door behind him with a soft click. "I told Leo you weren't as stupid as you looked. It's a shame being invisible was keeping you alive." He raised the gun. Time to disappear for good. The click of the safety being disengaged on Rossi's gun sounded like a cracking branch in the dead of winter. Clara didn't move. She didn't drop the ledger. Her fingers dug into the leather binding, the rough edges biting into her skin. Her breath came slow and heavy, the familiar protective numbness settling over her. "You think he'll believe you?" Rossi sneered, his voice dropping to a low, lethal hiss. He took 2 steps forward, the polished leather of his loafers silent on the Persian rug. A fat waitress from Hell's Kitchen versus his consigliere of 12 years. Even if you run out of this room screaming, you're just a hysterical broad who got caught snooping where she didn't belong. "He'll believe the numbers," Clara said, her voice surprisingly steady, though her knees trembled violently beneath her sweatpants. "Numbers don't have a motive, Mr. Rossi. You forgot that I look at the invoices for the kitchen supplies, too. You've been inflating the cleaning contract for 880 Fifth Avenue by $8,500 a month since last April. That money goes straight to a Jersey City routing number. You're sloppy when you think no one is looking." Rossi's smile vanished completely. The smug arrogance was replaced by a raw, feral panic. He raised the gun higher, aligning the sight with the center of her forehead. "Smart bitch, but a bullet doesn't care how good you are at math." His knuckles whitened on the trigger. A sudden violent crash shattered the silence. The heavy oak door didn't just open. It splintered off its frame as Dante threw his entire weight against it. Before Rossi could pivot, Dante was across the room. He didn't use a gun. He slammed his fist into Rossi's face, the impact throwing the older man over the mahogany desk. Glass shattered. The green-shaded banker's lamp went flying, sparking as it hit the floor. Dante didn't stop. He dragged Rossi up by his silk tie, his face contorted into something monstrous, a primal rage that made the air in the room feel thick and suffocating. He threw Rossi onto the floor, pinning him with a heavy knee to the chest. "Dant, wait!" Rossi choked out, blood leaking from his nose, painting his teeth red. "She's a spy. She's looking through your books. I caught her. I told her to look." Dante roared, his voice shaking the glass panes of the office window. He pulled a compact Beretta from his waistband, pressing the cold steel barrel directly into Rossi's eye socket. "I knew there was a leak in Newark. I just couldn't prove it. She proved it in 3 weeks. You sold out my brother's memory for a Jersey payout." "No, Dante, please, we were boys together in Brooklyn, and you'll die together," Dante whispered. His finger tightened on the trigger. "Dante, don't," Clara said. Da paused, his chest heaving, his eyes wild as he looked up at her. He looked like a man possessed, a demon masquerading in a bespoke suit. "He tried to kill you, Clara. He's a traitor. If you kill him here now, you lose the leverage," Clara said, stepping closer, her voice acting like a cooling anchor in his storm of rage. "Look at the ledger. He hasn't moved the $1, $2 million from Doc 4 yet." The text message said, "The doc is clear, but the wire transfer doesn't clear until December 15th. That's 3 days from now. If he disappears tonight, the Morettis will know the play is dead. They'll disappear into the woodwork, and they'll come for you from another angle. Keep him alive. Used him to feed them what you want them to hear." Dante stared at her. The wildness in his eyes slowly receded, replaced by a cold, calculating brilliance. He looked at Rossi, then back at Clara, a profound sense of awe washing over his features. He lowered the gun. "You're wasted in a diner, Clara," he murmured. He stood up, smoothing the front of his jacket, though his hands were still trembling with adrenaline. He kicked Rossi in the ribs, a casual, brutal afterthought. "Get up, Thomas. You just got a promotion. You're going to be my official mouthpiece to New Jersey. And if you miss a single syllable of the script Clara writes for you, I won't just kill you. I'll make sure you watch me dismantle everything you love first." Rossi curled into a ball on the floor, weeping openly, his dignity entirely stripped away by the woman he had dismissed as a fat cow less than 10 minutes ago. Over the next 48 hours, the penthouse became a war room. But it wasn't the men who ran the strategy. It was Clara. She sat at the dining table, surrounded by maps of the New York and New Jersey waterfronts, her laptop humming as she monitored the dummy accounts. Dante stood behind her, his hands resting on the back of her chair, a protective shadow. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Clara had Rossi text his Moretti contact, confirming that Dante was traveling to a secure warehouse at 1400 Warehouse Lane in Elizabeth, New Jersey, on the night of December 14th, to personally oversee a major shipment of untraceable currency, $5 million in cash. It was a trap. The warehouse would be surrounded by Dante's most loyal enforcers. The Moretti family would step into a meat grinder. By 9 p.m. on December 14th, the penthouse was empty. Dante had left with Leo Capelli and 30 heavily armed men, leaving Clara alone in the apartment with 2 guards stationed at the elevator. The silence of the penthouse returned, but this time it felt heavy with anticipation. Clara sat in the living room, a cup of chamomile tea warming her hands. She looked at the clock. 10:15 p.m. The hit should be happening right now. Her phone buzzed on the glass table. It was an unknown number. She picked it up. "Hello, Clara," a voice gasped. It was Dante, but he wasn't angry. He sounded weak, terrified, a sound she had never heard from him before. "It's a setup. Leo was the second leak. They knew we were coming. We walked right into a crossfire. I'm hit bad. We're at the old rail yard off Route 1. They're hunting us. Clara, I need. The line went dead. Clara's heart stopped. The tea mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the white marble floor, the dark liquid pooling around her feet like old blood. Leo, the underboss whose jaw Dante had broken for her. It hadn't been just Rossi. It was a dual betrayal. She stood up, her mind spinning. Dante was dying in a ditch in New Jersey. The guards outside her door were loyal to the family, but who did they answer to if Dante was gone? Leo, she had to move. The engine of the Escalade screamed. The massive black grille crushed the rusted chain-link fence, tires churning through the thick New Jersey mud. Leo turned, his eyes widening in sudden, sharp terror as the headlights blinded him. He tried to dive, but he wasn't fast enough. The heavy steel bumper clipped him sideways, throwing his body 15 feet through the air like a broken rag doll. He hit a stack of old wooden railroad ties with a sickening crunch and lay entirely still. Clara slammed the transmission into park, throwing herself out of the driver's seat. She stumbled in the mud, her orthopedic shoes losing grip, but she scrambled to her hands and knees, dragging her heavy body across the wet earth toward Dante. "Dant," she cried out, the cold rain stinging her face. He was slipping away. His eyes were unfocused, rolling back, his breath a faint, bubbly rattle. She tore open his shirt. 2 entry wounds in the abdomen. Blood was pouring out of him, washing away in the freezing puddles. "Clara," he choked out, his hand weakly reaching for hers. "You came—" "Shut up," she sobbed, pressing her large hands firmly over the bullet holes. The heat of his blood seeped through her fingers. "You told me to be myself. Well, I'm a woman who doesn't let people die on her floor. Hold on." She checked the perimeter. The area was eerie, dead silent save for the drumming rain. Leo's men were either dead or had fled when the armored truck materialized. She hooked her arms under Dante's armpits. With a tremendous, agonizing heave, her muscles screaming under the strain, she dragged his 6'2" frame across the gravel and managed to hoist him into the back seat of the Escalade. She drove blindly, bypassing the city hospitals, where the Morettis or the police would be waiting. Instead, she tore down Route 9, pulling up to the back entrance of a small, dimly lit suburban clinic in Woodbridge, a place she knew handled private medical care under the table for the right amount of cash. She threw 3 stacks of Dante's bloodied $100 bills from his glove compartment at the trembling doctor on duty. "Fix him," she commanded, "or I will tear this building down." For 7 hours, Clara sat in the vinyl chair of the tiny waiting room. Her clothes were soaked, covered in mud and drying blood. Her large frame occupied the entire seating row, a mountain of silent anxiety. Just before dawn on December 15th, the doctor stepped out, wiping his hands. "He's stable. The bullets missed the aorta by millimeters. He's asking for you." Clara walked into the small recovery room. Dante lay under a white sheet, his face pale, but the slate in his eyes had returned. He looked at her, his lips twitching into a faint, exhausted smile. "They think I'm dead," Dante whispered, his voice weak but clear. "Leo's people, the Morettis, they think they won." "They didn't win," Clara said softly, sitting beside him. "The wire transfer for the $1, $2 million from Dock 4 cleared an hour ago. I monitored it from my phone. It didn't go to the Morettis. I intercepted the routing codes from Rossi's files last night. I rerouted the entire sum into a secure trust fund under your brother's name. The Moretti family is currently broke, and their enforcers are demanding payouts they don't have." Dante stared at her, a profound silence settling over the room. He reached out, his long, scarred fingers wrapping around her thick, calloused hand. He didn't look at her size. He didn't look at her stained clothes. He looked at the woman who had rewritten the rules of his violent, lonely world. "They laughed at you," Dante said, his voice thick with an emotion he had never allowed himself to feel. "My men, the world. They thought you were nothing." "I know what I am," Clara said quietly. "You are untouchable," Dante corrected, his grip tightening. "And so am I because of you." 6 months later, on May 18, 2026, the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was bathed in gold light. The new captains of the Rossetti family sat at the long table, their expressions tense, respectful, and absolutely terrified. Dante sat at the head of the table, entirely recovered, his power absolute. The Morettis were gone, Rossi was serving a lifetime in a black site basement, and the Rossetti empire had doubled its holdings. The heavy double doors of the ballroom opened. Clara walked in. She wore a custom-tailored emerald green silk gown that flowed over her curves, her head held high, her shoulders square. She didn't look like a waitress. She looked like a queen. Dante stood up immediately, silencing the entire room. He walked down the length of the table, offering his arm to her. The men watched in absolute silence, not a single snicker, not a single smirk. They knew exactly who held the ledger. They knew who held the red pen. He leaned down, whispering in her ear, as he pulled out the velvet chair at the head of the table beside his. "Welcome home, Clara." Clara smiled, the numbers in her head finally balancing to 0. But the silence in the room was suddenly broken by the scrape of a heavy wooden chair. At the far end of the long mahogany table, Dominic Gallo, a caporegime from Brooklyn who had absorbed Leo's remaining territories, stood up. He smoothed the lapels of his $4,200 Brioni suit, his eyes narrowing at Clara. "With all due respect, boss," Dominic started, his voice a gravelly rumble that echoed off the gold leaf ceiling. "I understand she saved your life. Put her up in a penthouse. Give her $1 million. But sitting a waitress at the head of the commission table, it makes us look weak. The Irish crews are already whispering." Dante didn't move. He didn't reach for the Kimber 1911 holstered under his jacket, nor did he raise his voice. He simply leaned back in his velvet chair, poured himself a measure of 1998 Macallan, and looked at Clara. He was giving her the floor. He was demanding she take it. Clara didn't flinch. She didn't shrink into her silk gown. She reached out and picked up a heavy silver soup spoon, admiring her own steady, unbothered reflection in its polished curve, before setting it gently on the linen tablecloth. "Dominic Gallo," Clara said, her voice carrying the exact same flat, deadpan tone she used to use on belligerent drunks at the Rusty Spoon. "On March 12, 2026, you authorized a ghost payroll for the sanitation union operating out of Red Hook. You skimmed $114,500. You didn't kick it up to the family coffers. Beneath the grit and shadows of a ruthless empire, Dante found his armor in the woman the world chose to ignore. True power isn't measured in muscle or malice. It's found in the quiet, unbreakable courage of a soul that refuses to be diminished. If Clara's fierce loyalty and brilliant mind moved you tonight, please smash that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss another gripping tale.